Welcome to Mythology at Dusk. Take a slow breath. Whatever the day has held, however heavy it has been, let it settle now. Tonight, we visit ancient Egypt. Tonight, one god of Egypt, the one who waits at the door of the dead. Anubis was pictured with the head of a black jackal, the animal that prowled the burial grounds along the edge of the desert, and long before the pharaohs, he was the god the first Egyptians trusted with the care of the tomb. In the great hall of Maat, he would set a human heart on one pan of a scale and a single feather of truth on the other, and wait for the reading. Tonight, slowly, we'll walk with him through the desert cemeteries, through the Osiris cycle, and into the quiet weighing of the heart. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now. Every comment helps this small channel reach someone else who needs quiet tonight. And if Mythology at Dusk has helped you sleep, consider subscribing so tomorrow night's story is ready when you are. Now close your eyes. Take a slow breath. Let the old stories carry you. Let us begin. Osiris, Lord of the Dead. From Part 1, Osiris, one of the principal figures in the Egyptian pantheon, and one whose elements it is most difficult to disentangle, is Osiris, or Azar. The oldest and most simple form of the name is expressed by two hieroglyphics, representing a throne and an eye. These, however, cast but little light on the meaning of the name. Even the later Egyptians themselves were ignorant of its derivation, for we find that they thought it meant the strength of the eye, that is, the strength of the sun god, Ra. The second syllable of the name, Ar, may, however, be in some manner connected with Ra, as we shall see later. In dynastic times, Osiris was regarded as god of the dead and the underworld. Indeed, he occupied the same position in that sphere as Ra did in the land of the living. We must also recollect that the realm of the underworld was the realm of night. The origins of Osiris are extremely obscure. We cannot glean from the texts when or where he first began to be worshipped, but that his cult is greatly more ancient than any text is certain. The earliest dynastic centers of his worship were Abydos and Mendes. He is perhaps represented on a mace head of Narmer found at Hierakonpolis, and on a wooden plaque of the reign of Udi-Mu, Den, or Hesepti, the fifth king of the first dynasty, who is figured as dancing before him. This shows that a center of Osiris worship existed at Abydos during the first dynasty. But allusions in the pyramid texts give us to understand that prior to this, shrines had been raised to Osiris in various parts of the Nile country. As has been outlined in the chapter on the Book of the Dead, Osiris dwells peaceably in the underworld with the justified, judging the souls of the departed as they appear before him. This paradise was known as Aru, which, it is important to note, although situated in the underworld, was originally thought to be in the sky. Osiris is usually figured as wrapped in mummy bandages and wearing the white cone-shaped crown of the south, yet Dr. Budge says of him, "Everything which the texts of all periods record concerning him goes to show that he was an indigenous god of northeast Africa, and that his home and origin were possibly Libyan." In any case, we may take it that Osiris was genuinely African in origin, and that he was indigenous to the soil of the Dark Continent. Brugsch and Sir Gaston Maspero both regarded him as a water god, and thought that he represented the creative and nutritive powers of the Nile stream in general, and of the inundation in particular. This theory is agreed to by Dr. Budge, but if Osiris is a god of the Nile alone, why import him from the Libyan desert, which boasts of no rivers? River gods do not as a rule emanate from regions of sand. Before proceeding further, it will be well to relate the myth of Osiris. The myth of Osiris. Plutarch is our principal authority for the legend of Osiris. A complete version of the tale is not to be found in Egyptian texts, though these confirm the accounts given by the Greek writers. The following is a brief account of the myth as it is related in Plutarch's De Isidore et Osiride. Rhea, the Egyptian nut, the sky goddess, was the wife of Helios, Ra. She was, however, beloved by Kronos, Geb, whose affection she returned. When Ra discovered his wife's infidelity, he was wrathful indeed and pronounced a curse upon her, saying that her child should not be born in any month or in any year. Now, the curse of Ra, the mighty, could not be turned aside, for Ra was the chief of all the gods. In her distress, Nut called upon the god Thoth, the Greek Hermes, who also loved her. Thoth knew that the curse of Ra must be fulfilled, yet by a very cunning stratagem, he found a way out of the difficulty. He went to Selene, the moon goddess, whose light rivaled that of the sun himself, and challenged her to a game of tables. The stakes on both sides were high, but Selene staked some of her light, the 70th part of each of her illuminations, and lost. Thus, it came about that her light wanes and dwindles at certain periods, so that she is no longer the rival of the sun. From the light which he had won from the moon goddess Thoth, made 5 days which he added to the year, at that time consisting of 360 days, in such wise that they belong neither to the preceding, nor to the following year, nor to any month. On these 5 days, Nut was delivered of her 5 children. Osiris was born on the first day, Horus on the second, Set on the third, Isis on the fourth, and Nephthys on the fifth. On the birth of Osiris, a loud voice was heard throughout all the world saying, "The Lord of all the earth is born." A slightly different tradition relates that a certain man named Pammeles, carrying water from the temple of Ra at Thebes, heard a voice commanding him to proclaim the birth of the good and great King Osiris, which he straightway did. For this reason, the education of the young Osiris was entrusted to Pammeles. Thus, it is said, was the festival of the Pamilia instituted. In course of time, the prophecies concerning Osiris were fulfilled, and he became a great and wise king. The land of Egypt flourished under his rule as it had never done heretofore. Like many another hero god, he set himself the task of civilizing his people, who at his coming were in a very barbarous condition, indulging in cannibalistic and other savage practices. He gave them a code of laws, taught them the arts of husbandry, and showed them the proper rites wherewith to worship the gods. And when he had succeeded in establishing law and order in Egypt, he betook himself to distant lands to continue there his work of civilization. So gentle and good was he, and so pleasant were his methods of instilling knowledge into the minds of the barbarians, that they worshipped the very ground whereon he trod. Set, the enemy. He had one bitter enemy, however, in his brother Set, the Greek Typhon. During the absence of Osiris, his wife Isis ruled the country so well that the schemes of the wicked Set to take a share in its government were not allowed to mature. But on the king's return, Set fixed on a plan whereby to rid himself altogether of the king, his brother. For the accomplishment of his ends, he leagued himself with Aso, the queen of Ethiopia, and 72 other conspirators. Then, after secretly measuring the king's body, he caused to be made a marvelous chest, richly fashioned and adorned, which would contain exactly the body of Osiris. This done, he invited his fellow plotters and his brother the king to a great feast. Now Osiris had frequently been warned by the queen to beware of Set, but, having no evil in himself, the king feared it not in others, so he betook himself to the banquet. When the feast was over, Set had the beautiful chest brought into the banqueting hall, and said, as though in jest, that it should belong to him whom it would fit. One after another the guests lay down in the chest, but it fitted none of them till the turn of Osiris came. Quite unsuspicious of treachery, the king laid himself down in the great receptacle. In a moment, the conspirators had nailed down the lid, pouring boiling lead over it, lest there should be any aperture. Then they set the coffin adrift on the Nile, at its Tanaitic mouth. These things befell, say some, in the 28th year of Osiris's life. Others say in the 28th year of his reign. When the news reached the ears of Isis, she was sore stricken, and cut off a lock of her hair and put on mourning apparel. Knowing well that the dead cannot rest till their bodies have been buried with funeral rites, she set out to find the corpse of her husband. For a long time, her search went unrewarded, though she asked every man and woman she met whether they had seen the richly decorated chest. At length, it occurred to her to inquire of some children who played by the Nile, and, as it chanced, they were able to tell her that the chest had been brought to the Tanaitic mouth of the Nile by Set and his accomplices. From that time, children were regarded by the Egyptians as having some special faculty of divination. The tamarisk tree. By and by the queen gained information of a more exact kind through the agency of demons, by whom she was informed that the chest had been cast up on the shore of Byblos and flung by the waves into a tamarisk bush, which had shot up miraculously into a magnificent tree, enclosing the coffin of Osiris in its trunk. The king of that country, Melkarthus by name, was astonished at the height and beauty of the tree, and had it cut down and a pillar made from its trunk, wherewith to support the roof of his palace. Within this pillar, therefore, was hidden the chest containing the body of Osiris. Isis hastened with all speed to Byblos, where she seated herself by the side of a fountain. To none of those who approached her would she vouchsafe a word, saving only to the queen's maidens, and these she addressed very graciously, braiding their hair and perfuming them with her breath, more fragrant than the odor of flowers. When the maidens returned to the palace, the queen inquired how it came that their hair and clothes were so delightfully perfumed, whereupon they related their encounter with the beautiful stranger. Queen Astarte, or Athenais, bade that she be conducted to the palace, welcomed her graciously, and appointed her nurse to one of the young princes. The grief of Isis. Isis fed the boy by giving him her finger to suck. Every night, when all had retired to rest, she would pile great logs on the fire and thrust the child among them, and, changing herself into a swallow, would twitter mournful lamentations for her dead husband. Rumors of these strange practices were brought by the queen's maidens to the ears of their mistress, who determined to see for herself whether or not there was any truth in them. So she concealed herself in the great hall, and when night came, sure enough, Isis barred the doors and piled logs on the fire, thrusting the child among the glowing wood. The queen rushed forward with a loud cry and rescued her boy from the flames. The goddess reproved her sternly, declaring that by her action she had deprived the young prince of immortality. Then Isis revealed her identity to the awe-stricken Athenais and told her story, begging that the pillar which supported the roof might be given to her. When her request had been granted, she cut open the tree, took out the coffin containing the body of Osiris, and mourned so loudly over it that one of the young princes died of terror. Then she took the chest by sea to Egypt, being accompanied on the journey by the elder son of King Melkarthus. The child's ultimate fate is variously recounted by several conflicting traditions. The tree which had held the body of the god was long preserved and worshipped at Byblos. Arrived in Egypt, Isis opened the chest and wept long and sorely over the remains of her royal husband. But now she bethought herself of her son Harpocrates, or Horus the child, whom she had left in Buto, and leaving the chest in a secret place, she set off to search for him. Meanwhile, Set, while hunting by the light of the moon, discovered the richly adorned coffin, and in his rage rent the body into 14 pieces, which he scattered here and there throughout the country. Upon learning of this fresh outrage on the body of the god, Isis took a boat of papyrus reeds and journeyed forth once more in search of her husband's remains. After this, crocodiles would know. The Search of Isis. From Part 2, Oat touch a papyrus boat, probably because they thought it contained the goddess, still pursuing her weary search. Whenever Isis found a portion of the corpse, she buried it and built a shrine to mark the spot. It is for this reason that there are so many tombs of Osiris in Egypt. The vengeance of Horus. By this time, Horus had reached manhood, and Osiris, returning from the Duat, where he reigned as king of the dead, encouraged him to avenge the wrongs of his parents. Horus thereupon did battle with Set, the victory falling now to one, now to the other. At one time, Set was taken captive by his enemy and given into the custody of Isis, but the latter, to her son's amazement and indignation, set him at liberty. So angry was Horus that he tore the crown from his mother's head. Thoth, however, gave her a helmet in the shape of a cow's head. Another version states that Horus cut off his mother's head, which Thoth, the maker of magic, stuck on again in the form of a cow's. Horus and Set, it is said, still do battle with one another, yet victory has fallen to neither. When Horus shall have vanquished his enemy, Osiris will return to earth and reign once more as king in Egypt. Sir J.G. Fraser on Osiris. From the particulars of this myth, Sir J.G. Fraser has argued that Osiris was one of those personifications of vegetation whose annual death and resurrection have been celebrated in so many lands, that he was a god of vegetation analogous to Adonis and Attis. The general similarity of the myth and ritual of Osiris to those of Adonis and Attis, says Sir J.G. Fraser, is obvious. In all three cases, we see a god whose untimely and violent death is mourned by a loving goddess and annually celebrated by his worshippers. The character of Osiris as a deity of vegetation is brought out by the legend that he was the first to teach men the use of corn, and by the custom of beginning his annual festival with the tillage of the ground. He is said also to have introduced the cultivation of the vine. In one of the chambers dedicated to Osiris in the great temple of Isis at Philae, the dead body of Osiris is represented with stalks of corn springing from it, and a priest is depicted watering the stalks from a pitcher which he holds in his hand. The accompanying legend sets forth that this is the form of him whom one may not name, Osiris of the mysteries, who springs from the returning waters. It would seem impossible to devise a more graphic way of depicting Osiris as a personification of the corn, while the inscription attached to the picture proves that this personification was the kernel of the mysteries of the god, the innermost secret that was only revealed to the initiated. In estimating the mythical character of Osiris, very great weight must be given to this monument. The story that his mangled remains were scattered up and down the land may be a mythical way of expressing either the sowing or the winnowing of the grain. The latter interpretation is supported by the tale that Isis placed the severed limbs of Osiris on a corn sieve. Or the legend may be a reminiscence of the custom of slaying a human victim as a representative of the corn spirit, and distributing his flesh or scattering his ashes over the fields to fertilize them. But Osiris was more than a spirit of the corn. He was also a tree spirit, and this may well have been his original character, since the worship of trees is naturally older in the history of religion than the worship of the cereals. His character as a tree spirit was represented very graphically in a ceremony described by Firmicus Maternus. A pine tree having been cut down, the center was hollowed out, and with the wood thus excavated, an image of Osiris was made, which was then buried in the hollow of the tree. Here, again, it is hard to imagine how the conception of a tree as tenanted by a personal being could be more plainly expressed. The image of Osiris thus made was kept for a year and then burned, exactly as was done with the image of Attis, which was attached to the pine tree. The ceremony of cutting the tree, as described by Firmicus Maternus, appears to be alluded to by Plutarch. It was probably the ritual counterpart of the mythical discovery of the body of Osiris enclosed in the erica tree. We may conjecture that the erection of the tattoo pillar at the close of the annual festival of Osiris was identical with the ceremony described by Firmicus. It is to be noted that in the myth, the erica tree formed a pillar in the king's house. Like the similar custom of cutting a pine tree and fastening an image to it, in the rites of Attis, the ceremony perhaps belonged to the class of customs of which the bringing in the maypole is among the most familiar. As to the pine tree in particular, at Dendera, the tree of Osiris is a conifer, and the coffer containing the body of Osiris is here depicted as enclosed within the tree. A pine cone often appears on the monuments as an offering presented to Osiris, and a manuscript of the Louvre speaks of the cedar as sprung from him. The sycamore and the tamarisk are also his trees. In inscriptions he is spoken of as residing in them, and his mother Nut is frequently portrayed in a sycamore. In a sepulchre at Hau, Diospolis Parva, a tamarisk is depicted overshadowing the coffer of Osiris. And in the series of sculptures which illustrate the mystic history of Osiris in the great temple of Isis at Philae, a tamarisk is figured with two men pouring water on it. The inscription on this last monument leaves no doubt, says Brugsch, that the verdure of the earth was believed to be connected with the verdure of the tree, and that the sculpture refers to the grave of Osiris at Philae, of which Plutarch tells us that it was overshadowed by a methide plant, taller than any olive tree. This sculpture, it may be observed, occurs in the same chamber in which the god is depicted as a corpse with ears of corn sprouting from him. In inscriptions, he is referred to as the one in the tree, the solitary one in the acacia, and so forth. On the monuments, he sometimes appears as a mummy covered with a tree or with plants. It accords with the character of Osiris as a tree spirit that his worshippers were forbidden to injure fruit trees, and with his character as a god of vegetation in general, that they were not allowed to stop up wells of water, which are so important for the irrigation of hot southern lands. Sir J.G. Fraser goes on to combat the theory of Lepsius, that Osiris was to be identified with the sun god Ra. Osiris, says the German scholar, was named Osiris Ra even in the Book of the Dead, and Isis, his spouse, is often called the royal consort of Ra. This identification, Sir J.G. Fraser thinks, may have had a political significance. He admits that the myth of Osiris might express the daily appearance and disappearance of the sun, and points out that most of the writers who favor the solar theory are careful to indicate that it is the daily, and not the annual, course of the sun to which they understand the myth to apply. But then, why? Pertinently asks Sir J.G. Fraser, Was it celebrated by an annual ceremony? This fact alone seems fatal to the interpretation of the myth as descriptive of sunset and sunrise. Again, though the sun may be said to die daily, in what sense can it be said to be torn in pieces? Plutarch says that some of the Egyptian philosophers interpreted Osiris as the moon, because the moon, with her humid and generative light, is favorable to the propagation of animals and the growth of plants. Among primitive peoples, the moon is regarded as a great source of moisture. Vegetation is thought to flourish beneath her pale rays, and she is understood as fostering the multiplication of the human species, as well as animal and plant life. Sir J.G. Fraser enumerates several reasons to prove that Osiris possessed a lunar significance. Briefly, these are that he is said to have lived or reigned 28 years, the mythical expression of a lunar month, and that his body is said to have been rent into 14 pieces. This might be interpreted as the waning moon, which appears to lose a portion of itself on each of the 14 days that make up the second half of the lunar month. Typhon found the body of Osiris at the full moon. Thus, its dismemberment would begin with the waning of the moon. Primitive conceptions of the moon. Primitive man explains the waning moon as actually dwindling, and it appears to him as if it is being broken in pieces or eaten away. The Klamath Indians of southwest Oregon allude to the moon as the one broken in pieces, and the Dakotas believe that when the moon is full, a horde of mice begin to nibble at one side of it until they have devoured the whole. To continue Sir J.G. Fraser's argument, he quotes Plutarch to the effect that at the new moon of the month, Phanemoth, which was the beginning of spring, the Egyptians celebrated what they called the entry of Osiris into the moon, that at the ceremony called the burial of Osiris, they made a crescent-shaped chest, because the moon, when it approaches the sun, assumes the form of a crescent and vanishes, and that once a year, at the full moon, pigs, possibly symbolical of Set or Typhon, were sacrificed simultaneously to the moon and to Osiris. Again, in a hymn supposed to be addressed by Isis to Osiris, it is said that Thoth placeth thy soul in the bark mut, in that name which is thine of God Moon. And again, thou who comest to us as a child each month, we do not cease to contemplate thee. Thine emanation heightens the brilliancy of the stars of Orion in the firmament. In this hymn, Osiris is deliberately identified with the moon. In effect, then, Sir James Fraser's theory regarding Osiris is that he was a vegetation or corn god who later became identified or confounded with the moon. But surely it is as reasonable to suppose that it was because of his status as moon god that he ranked as a deity of vegetation. A brief consideration of the circumstances connected with lunar worship might lead us to some such supposition. The sun in his status of deity requires but little explanation. The phenomena of growth are attributed to his agency at an early period of human thought, and it is probable that wind, rain, and other atmospheric manifestations are likewise credited to his action or regarded as emanations from him. Especially is this the case in tropical climates, where the rapidity of vegetable growth is such as to afford to man an absolute demonstration of the solar power. By analogy, then, that son of the night, the moon, comes to be regarded as an agency of growth, and primitive peoples attribute to it powers in this respect almost equal to those of the sun. Again, it must be borne in mind that, for some reasons still obscure, the moon is regarded as the great reservoir of magical power. The two great orbs of night and day require but little excuse for godhead. To primitive man, the sun is obviously godlike, for upon him the barbarian agriculturist depends for his very existence, and there is behind him no history of an evolution from earlier forms. It is likewise with the moon god. In the Libyan desert at night, the moon is an object which dominates the entire landscape, and it is difficult to believe that its intense brilliance and all-pervading light must not have deeply impressed the wandering tribes of that region with a sense of reverence and worship. Indeed, reverence for such an object might well press. The Manifold Isis. From Part 4, Nile Spring Wind. Manifold attributes of Isis. The myth of Isis became so real to the people of Egypt that they came to regard her very intimately indeed, and fully believed that she had once been a veritable woman. In a more allegorical manner, she was of course the great feminine fructifier of the soil. She was also a powerful enchantress, as is shown by the number of deities and human beings whom she rescued from death. Words of great and compelling power were hers. Her astronomical symbol was the star Sept, which marked the spring and the approach of the inundation of the Nile, and added evidence that in one of her phases she was goddess of the winds of spring. As the light giver at this season of the year she was called Kut, and as goddess of the fruitful earth Uzert. As the force which impelled the powers of spring and sent forth the Nile flood she was Sati, and as the goddess of fertile waters she was Anket. She was further the deity of cultivated lands and fields, goddess of harvest and goddess of food, so that from first to last she personified the forces which make for growth and nourishment. She personifies the power of the spring season, the power of the earth to grow and yield grain, motherhood, and all the attributes and affinities which spring therefrom. It is not necessary in this place to trace her worship into Greece, Rome, and Western Europe, where it became greatly degraded from its pristine purity. The dignified worship of the Great Mother took on, under European auspices, an orgiastic character which appealed to the false mystic of Greece, Rome, Gaul, and Britain, just as it does today to his transatlantic or Parisian prototype. But the strength of the cult in the country of its origin is evinced by the circumstance that it was not finally deserted until the middle of the 5th century AD. Horus. As we have seen, the god Ra was depicted as a falcon, but there was another god of similar form who had been worshipped before him in the land of Egypt. This was the god Heru, or Horus, he who is above. This god had many shapes. As Horus the Elder, he is delineated as a man with the head of a falcon, and was believed to be the son of Geb and Nut. Horus proper was perhaps regarded as the face of heaven, the countenance of the sky, and as Horus the Elder, he represented the face by day in contradistinction to Set, who was the face by night. Horus the Younger, or Harpocrates, as he was called by the Greeks to distinguish him from Horus the Elder, is represented as a youth, and was the son of a Horus god and the goddess Rat Tawit, who appears to have been worshipped at Hermonthis in the form of a hippopotamus. Horus the Younger represented the earliest rays of the rising sun and had no fewer than 7 aspects or forms. To detail all the variants of Horus would be foreign to the purpose of this work, so it must suffice to enumerate the more important of them. The Horus of the 2 horizons, the Harmakis of the Greeks, was one of the chief forms of the sun god Ra, and represented the sun in his diurnal course from sunrise to sunset. He thus included the personalities of Ra, Tem, and Khepera, and this affords a good example of the widespread system of overlapping which obtained in Egyptian mythology, and which does not appear to such an extent in any other mythology. Probably a number of these Horus gods were local. Thus we find Harmakis worshipped principally at Heliopolis, and Apollinopolis. His best-known monument is the famous Sphinx, near the pyramids of Gizeh. We find the first mention of the Sphinx in inscriptions in the days of Thothmes Thal. When we read in the text inscribed on the stele between the paws of the Sphinx the following legend of Thothmes and the Sphinx. The dream of Thothmes. There was a king in Egypt called Thothmes, a mighty monarch, skilled in the arts of war and of the chase. He was good to look upon, too, with a beauty like unto that of Horus, whom Isis bare in the northern marshes, and greatly was he loved by gods and men. He was wont to hunt in the burning desert, alone, or with only a few companions, and this is told of one of his hunting expeditions. One day, before he had ascended the throne of Egypt, he was hunting unattended in the desert. It was noontide, and the sun beat fiercely down upon him, so that he was fain to seek the shadow of the mighty Harmachis, the Sphinx. Great and powerful was the god, and very majestic was his image, with the face of a man and the body of a lion, a snake upon his brow. In many temples were sacrifices made to him. In many towns did men worship with their faces turned toward him. In the great cool shadow, Thothmes laid himself down to rest, and sleep enchained his senses. And as he slept, he dreamed, and behold, the Sphinx opened its lips and spoke to him. It was no longer a thing of motionless rock, but the god himself, the great Harmachis, and he addressed the dreamer thus: "Behold me, O Thothmes, for I am the sun god, the ruler of all peoples. Harmachis is my name, and Ra, and Khepera, and Tem. I am thy father, and thou art my son, and through me shall all good come upon thee, if thou wilt hearken to my words. The land of Egypt shall be thine, and the north land, and the south land. In prosperity and happiness shalt thou rule for many years." He paused, and it seemed to Thothmes as if the god were struggling to free himself from the overwhelming sands, for only his head was visible. "It is as thou seest," Harmachis resumed. "The sands of the desert are over me. Do that quickly which I command thee, O my son Thothmes." Ere Thothmes could reply, the vision faded and he awoke. The living god was gone, and in his place was the mighty image, hewn from the solid rock. And here the story must perforce end. It is inscribed on a stele in the little temple which lies between the paws of the Sphinx, and the remainder of the inscription is so defaced as to be indecipherable. Heru Behudeti. One of the greatest and most important of all the forms of Horus is Heru Behudeti, who typifies midday, and therefore the greatest heat of the sun. It was in this form that Horus waged war against Set. His principal shrines were at Edfu, Philae, Mesen, At-Ab, and Tanis, where he was worshipped under the form of a lion trampling upon its enemies. In general, however, he is depicted as hawk-headed and bearing in his hand a weapon, usually a club or mace, to symbolize his character as a destroyer. In the old Arthurian romances, and, indeed, in many medieval tales which have a mythological ancestry, we read of how certain knights in combat with their enemies grew stronger as the sun waxed in the heavens, and when his beams declined, their strength failed them. So was it with Sir Balin, with King Arthur, who in his frenzy slew thousands, and with St. George, the patron saint of England, originally an Egyptian hero. These figures were all probably sun gods at some early period of their development. They are obscure in birth and origin, as is the luminary they symbolize. That is, they spring from the darkness. Arthur's origin, for example, was unknown to him until the age of manhood, and the same holds good of Beowulf. As they grew in power, like the sun which they typify, the solar heroes frequently became insane, and laid about them with such pitiless fury that they slaughtered thousands in a manner of which no ordinary paladin would be capable. This is typical of the strength and fury of the sun at midday in eastern climates. Heru Behudeti, then, because he was god of the midday sun, was the pitiless warrior wielding the club, perhaps typifying sunstroke, and the bow and arrows, symbolizing his fierce beams, which were to destroy the dragon of night and his fiendish crew. He was well represented as a lion, for what is so fierce as the tropical sun? At midday, he was all-conquering and had trampled the night dragon out of sight. In this manner, too, he represented the force of good against that of evil. The following is the myth of his battles with Set and the battalions of his evil companions. The myth of the winged disc. In the year 363 of the reign of Ra-Harakti upon the earth, it befell that the god was in Nubia with a mighty army. Set, the evil one, had rebelled against him, for Ra was advanced in years, and Set was of all beings the most cunning and treacherous. He it was also who had slain his twin brother Osiris, the great and good king, and for this reason, Horus, the brother of Osiris, desired greatly to have his life. With his chariots and horsemen and foot soldiers, Ra embarked on the great river and came to Edfu, where Horus of Edfu joined him. "O Ra," said Horus, "great are thine enemies, and cunningly do they conspire against thee." "My son," answered Ra, "arm thee and go forth against mine enemies, and slay them speedily." Thereupon, Horus sought the aid of the god Thoth, the master of all magic, by whose aid he changed himself into a great sun disk, with resplendent wings outstretched on either side. Straight to the sun he flew, and from the heavens he looked so fiercely upon his enemies and Ra's, that they neither heard nor saw aright. Each man judged his neighbor to be a stranger, and a cry went up that the foe were upon them. Each turned his weapon against the other, the majority were slain, and the handful of survivors scattered. And Horus hovered for a while over the battle plain, hoping to find Set, but the arch-enemy was not there. He was hiding in the north country. Then Horus returned to Ra, who embraced him kindly. And Horus took Ra and the goddess Astarte and showed them the battlefield strewn with corpses. Ra, king of the gods, said to those in his train, "Come, let us voyage to the Nile, for our enemies are slain." But Set still had a large following, and some of his associates he commanded to turn themselves into crocodiles and hippopotami, so that they might swallow the occupants of the divine bark, and yet remain invulnerable by reason of their thick hides. Horus, however, had gathered his band of smiths, each of whom made for himself an iron lance and a chain, on which Thoth bestowed some of his ever-powerful magic. Horus also repeated the formulae in the book of slaying the hippopotamus, so that when the fierce animals charged up the river, the god was ready for them. Many of them were pierced by the magic weapons and died, while the remainder fled. Those who fled to the south were pursued by Horus, and were at length overtaken. Another great conflict ensued, wherein the followers of Set were again vanquished. According to the desire of Ra, a shrine was raised to commemorate the victory, and his image placed therein. Yet another encounter, however, was to take place in the Southland ere the followers of Set were utterly destroyed, the slaughter of the monsters. Then Horus and Ra sailed northward toward the sea in search of Set and his allies, hoping to slay all the crocodiles and hippopotami, which were the bodily forms of their foes. But the beasts kept under water, and 4 days had elapsed ere Horus caught sight of them. He at once attacked them and wrought great havoc with his glittering weapons, to the delight of Ra and Thoth, who watched the conflict from the boat. 142 prisoners were taken on this occasion. Yet did Horus continue to pursue his enemies, always in the form of a burning disk with wings like unto the sunset, and attended by the goddesses Nekhbet and Uazet in the shape of 2 snakes. Once more, he overtook the allies of Set, this time at the Wars of Horus and Set. From Part 5, Western Waters of Mert. On this occasion, as on the others, Horus was victorious, and nearly 400 prisoners were brought to the boat of Ra and slain. Then was Set very greatly incensed, and decided to come forth in person to do battle with Horus. Horrible indeed were his cries and curses when he heard the losses his army had sustained. And Horus and his followers went out to meet the army of Set, and long and furious was the battle. At length Horus took a prisoner whom he believed to be Set. The wretched being was dragged before Ra, who gave him into the hands of his captor, bidding the latter do with him what he would. Then Horus killed his prisoner, cut off his head, dragged him through the dust, and cut his body in pieces, even as Set had done to Osiris. But, after all, it was only one of Set's associates who had perished thus miserably. The evil one himself was still at large, vowing vengeance on his enemies. In the form of a large snake, he hid himself under the earth, while his followers took courage from the knowledge that he had eluded his enemy. Yet again, however, were they defeated by Horus, who slew great numbers of them. The gods remained for 6 days on the canal, waiting for the reappearance of the foe, but none were to be seen. Then Horus scattered abroad his followers to destroy the remnant of Set's army. The last 2 battles were fought at Thalu, Zaru, and at Shais, in Nubia. At Thalu, Horus took the form of a fierce lion and slew 142 enemies. At Shais, he appeared once more in the shape of a great shining disk with wings of splendid plumage, and with the goddesses Nekhbet and Uazet on either side of it in the shape of crowned snakes. On these occasions also Horus was victorious. There are various endings to this myth. It is said that the prisoner whom Horus caused to be decapitated was none other than Set, whose fate, however, did not hinder him from living again and taking the form of a serpent. According to this version, Horus of Edfu was accompanied by Horus the child, son of Isis and Osiris. In the same inscription which gives an account of the battles, Horus the elder and Horus the child are utterly confused at the end. So while Horus the elder fights the battles, Horus the child kills Set. They are looked upon as one and the same. On capturing Set, therefore, Horus, according to one account, delivered him into the hands of Isis, who cut off his head. Another version, again, has it that the decisive battle has not yet been fought, and that Horus will finally destroy his enemy when Osiris and the gods once more return to Earth. Other Horus legends. Yet another account states that when Horus the child had become a man, Set came forth and challenged him to mortal combat. So Horus set out in a boat splendidly decorated by Isis, who also laid magic spells upon it, so that its occupant might not be overcome. Meanwhile, the arch-foe of the gods had taken upon himself the shape of a huge red hippopotamus. And he caused a raging storm to break over the boats of Horus and his train, so that the waters were lashed into fury. And had it not been that the boats were protected by magic, all would assuredly have perished. Horus, however, held on his course undismayed. He had taken the form of a youth of giant stature and towered at the gilded prow of his boat, which shone like sunlight amid the storm and the darkness. A great harpoon was poised in his hand, such a weapon as an ordinary mortal could not lift. In the water, the red hippopotamus waited for the wrecking of the boat, so that he might swallow his enemies. But this he was destined never to do, for directly he showed himself above water, the mighty harpoon was launched at his head and sank into his brain. And this was the end of Set, the evil one, the murderer of Osiris and the enemy of Ra. In honor of Horus, the conqueror hymns and triumphal choruses were sung throughout the land. In the myth of the battles of Horus, it is easy to discern what is perhaps the most universal of all mythological conceptions, the solar myth. Horus, called in the Edfu text Hor-Behuti, i.e. Horus of Edfu, was originally a sun god, and as such was equivalent to Ra. But in time, the two gods came to be regarded as separate and distinct personages, Ra being the highest, and Horus serving him as a sort of war captain. The winged disc, therefore, and all his train represented the powers of light, while the wicked Set and his companions symbolized darkness. Thus it is that while Horus was always victorious over his enemies, he never succeeded, according to the most widespread form of the tradition, in destroying them utterly. When Horus had routed the enemy in the form of a winged disc, that symbol came to be regarded as an excellent protective against violence and destruction. It was therefore repeated many times, especially in the New Kingdom, in temples, on monuments, stelae, and so on, and it was believed that the more numerous the representations of it, the more efficacious did the charm become. In its simplest form, the image is merely that of a winged disc, but at times there is a serpent on either side of the disc, representing the goddesses Nekhbet and Uazet. The principal version of the myth, dealing with Hor-Behuti, or Horus of Edfu, was really a local form belonging to Edfu, though in time it gained a wider acceptance. In other forms of the legend, other gods took the chief role as destroyer of the enemies of Ra. With this legend of light and darkness came to be fused another, that which relates how Horus avenged the death of Osiris. It is noticeable that in this second myth there exists some confusion between Horus the Elder and Horus the Child, respectively brother and son of Osiris. No mention is made of Osiris in the Edfu text, but that this myth is a sequel to the legend of Osiris is implied by the circumstance that Set is handed over for punishment to Isis and Horus the Child. In the later form of the story, the conflict is not properly between light and darkness, but rather between the forces of good and evil. In this legend, one of the most noteworthy circumstances is that the followers of Horus were armed with weapons of metal. His followers are called in the Egyptian text Mesniu or Mesnitu, which in all probability signifies workers in metal or blacksmiths. The worshippers of Horus of Behudet continually alluded to him as Lord of the Forged City, or Edfu, where tradition asserted he carried on the work of a blacksmith. At Edfu, indeed, the great golden disk of the sun itself had been forged, as we see from a certain inscription, and in the temple of that city was a chamber behind the sanctuary called Mesnet, or the Foundry, where the blacksmith caste of priests attended upon the god. From sculptures upon the walls of the temple, we see that these are arrayed in short robes and a species of collar, which is almost a cape, that they carry their spears head downward, and a weapon of metal resembling a dagger. Horus of Behudet, who accompanies them, is dressed in a similar fashion and is represented as spearing a hippopotamus, round which he has wound a double chain of metal. This illustrates the story of the defeat of Set by Horus of Behudet, and we may be justified in believing that the legend possessed a more or less historic basis. Here, we have a tribe or caste of metalworkers at war with what is obviously a more primitive race, whom they defeat with their weapons of metal and bind with their chains, afterwards slaughtering them at leisure. It is significant that they do not slay them out of hand. For what, then, do they reserve them? Obviously for human sacrifice. They are a caste of sun worshippers, and human blood was as necessary to the sustenance of the sun in early Egypt as it was in ancient Mexico, where the military caste, living under the patronage of the sun, always refrained from slaying an enemy in battle if they could make him prisoner, to be sacrificed at leisure. The circumstances of the legend would appear to indicate that we are here following the adventures of some West Asiatic invader who, with followers armed with metal, landed on the soil of Egypt, made himself master of Edfu, and, marching northward, established himself in the land by force of arms. This story, or portion of history, probably became amalgamated, perhaps by priestly influence, with the legend of Horus, the god of heaven in the earliest times. Another important form of Horus was that known as Horus, son of Isis and of Osiris. He represented the rising sun, as did several other forms of Horus, and possessed many aspects or variants. His shrines were so numerous that at one epoch or another he was identified with all the other Horus gods, but he chiefly represented the new sun, born daily, and he was son and successor of Osiris. He was extremely popular as being a well-marked type of resurrection after death. As Osiris represented yesterday, so Horus, his son, stood for today in the Egyptian mind. Although some texts state that Osiris was his father, others claim this position for Ra, but the two in this instance are really one and the same and interchangeable. Osiris became the father of Horus after he was dead. Such is the origin of several sun heroes. As has been said, the birth of such is usually peculiar and obscure. Isis, while tending the infant Horus, and in fear of the persecutions of Set, took shelter in the swamps of the delta and hid herself and her child amidst a dense mass of papyrus plants. To the Egyptian of the delta, it would of course seem as if the sun took its rise from amidst the papyrus-covered swamps which stretched on every side to the horizon, so we may regard this part of the myth as allegory, pure and simple. The circumstances of the escape of Isis from Set have already been detailed in the myth of Osiris. The filial respect which Horus displayed for the memory of his father Osiris won him much honor from the Egyptians. He it was who fixed the details of the god's mummification, and who set the standard for the pious Egyptian son. In this respect, he was regarded as a helper of the dead, and was thought to mediate between them and the judges of the Taut. In his work of caring for the deceased, he had a number of helpers, known as the followers of Horus, who were regarded as gods of the cardinal points. They are given positions of great importance in the Book of the Dead, and shared the protection of the body of the deceased, as has been mentioned in the paragraph concerning the mummy. They were 4 in number and were named Hapi, Tuamutef, Amset, and Kebsenuf. Horus, son of Isis and Osiris, was regarded as of such importance that he absorbed the attributes of all the other Horus gods, but in certain texts he is represented as a child, with forefinger to lip, and wearing the lock of hair at the side of the head which indicates youth. In later times, he was figured in a great many different fanciful forms. The Black Hog, Ra, Set, and Horus are concerned in an Egyptian myth which attempts an explanation of eclipses of the sun and moon. Set and Horus were bitter enemies, yet Set did not dare to enter the fray openly, for he feared Horus as evil must ever fear good. So he devised subtle and underhand schemes whereby he might compass the fall of Horus, and this is how the matter fell out. One day Horus sought Ra with a request to be allowed to read the future in his eyes. This request Ra granted willingly because of his love for Horus, the belover. The Book of the Dead. From Part 8. On the grave are known to have been in use among the Egyptians as early as 4000 BC. The oldest form of the Book of the Dead known to us is represented in the pyramid texts. With the invention of mummification, a more complete funerary ritual arose, based on the hope that such ceremonies as it imposed would ensure the corpse against corruption, preserve it forever, and introduce it to a beatified existence among the gods. Almost immediately prior to the dynastic era, a great stimulus appears to have been given to the cult of Osiris throughout Egypt. He had now become the god of the dead par excellence, and his dogma taught that from the preserved corpse would spring a beautified astral body, the future home of the spirit of the deceased. It therefore became necessary to adopt measures of the greatest precaution for the preservation of human remains. The generality of the texts comprised in the Book of the Dead are in one form or another of much greater antiquity than the period of Mena, the first historical king of Egypt. Indeed, from internal evidence it is possible to show that many of these were revised or edited long before the copies known to us were made, even at as early a date as 3300 BC. The professional writers who transcribed the ancient texts appear to have been so puzzled by their contents that they hardly understood their purport. Dr. Beam Budge states, "We are in any case justified in estimating the earliest form of the work to be contemporaneous with the foundation of the civilization which we call Egyptian in the valley of the Nile. A discovery 3400 years old. A hieratic inscription upon the sarcophagus of Queen Khnum-Nefert, wife of Mentuhotep, a king of the 11th dynasty, c. 2500 BC, states that a certain chapter of the Book of the Dead was discovered in the reign of Hasep-T, the 5th king of the 1st dynasty, who flourished about 4266 BC. This sarcophagus affords us two copies of the said chapter, one immediately following the other, that as early as 2500 BC, a chapter of the Book of the Dead should be referred to a date almost 2000 years before that time is astounding, and the mind reels before the idea of a tradition which, during comparatively unlettered centuries, could have conserved a religious formula almost unimpaired. Thus, 34 centuries ago, a portion of the Book of the Dead was regarded as extremely ancient, mysterious, and difficult of comprehension. It will be noted also that the inscription on the tomb of Queen Khnum-Nefert bears out that the chapter in question was discovered about 4266 BC. If it was merely discovered at that early era, what periods of remoteness lie between that epoch and the time when it was first reduced to writing? The description of the chapter on the sarcophagus of the royal lady states that this chapter was found in the foundations beneath the dweller in the Henu boat by the foreman of the builders in the time of the king of the south and north, Hasep-T, whose word is truth, and the Nebseni papyrus says that the chapter was found in the city of Kamenu, or Hermopolis, on a block of alabaster, written in letters of lapis lazuli, under the feet of the god, It also appears from the Turin Papyrus, which dates from the period of the 26th dynasty, that the name of the finder was Heru Tatar F, the son of Cheops, who was at the time engaged in a tour of inspection of the temples. Sir Gaston Maspero is doubtful concerning the importance which should be attached to the statement regarding the chapter on the tomb of Queen Khenem-Nefert, but Monsieur Naville considers the chapter in question one of the oldest in the Book of the Dead. A bas-relief of the Second Dynasty bears an inscription dedicating to the shade of a certain priest the formula of the thousands of loaves of bread, thousands of jugs of ale, and so forth, so common in later times. We thus see that 4,000 years BC, it was regarded as a religious duty to provide offerings of meat and drink for the dead, and there seems to be good evidence, from the nature of the formula in question, that it had become fixed and ritualistic by this period. This passage would appear to justify the text on the sarcophagus of the wife of Mentu-Hetep. A few centuries later, about the time of Seneferu, c. 3766 BC, the cult of the dead had expanded greatly from the architectural point of view, and larger and more imposing cenotaphs were provided for them. Victorious wars had brought much wealth to Egypt, and its inhabitants were better able to meet the very considerable expenditure entailed upon them by one of the most expensive cults known to the history of religion. In the reign of Menkau-Ra, a revision of certain parts of the text of the Book of the Dead appears to have been undertaken. The authority for this is the rubrics attached to certain chapters which state that they were found inscribed upon a block of alabaster in letters of lapis lazuli in the time of that monarch. We do not find a text comprising the Book of the Dead as a whole until the reign of Unas, 3333 BC, whose pyramid was opened in 1881 by Sir G. Maspero. The stone walls were covered with texts extremely difficult of decipherment because of their archaic character and spelling, among them many from the Book of the Dead. Continuing his excavations at Saqqara, Maspero made his way into the pyramid of Teta, 3300 BC, in which he discovered inscriptions, some of which were identical with those in the pyramid of Unas, so that the existence of a fully formed Book of the Dead by the time of the first king of the 6th dynasty was proven. Additional texts were found in the tomb of Pepidher, 3233 BC. From this, it will be seen that before the close of the 6th dynasty, 5 copies of a series of texts, forming the Book of the Dead of that period, are in evidence, and, as has been observed, there is substantial proof that its ceremonial was in vogue in the 2nd, and probably in the 1st, dynasty. Its text continued to be copied and employed until the 2nd century of the Christian era. It would appear that each chapter of the Book of the Dead had an independent origin, and it is probable that their inclusion and adoption into the body of the work were spread over many centuries. It is possible that some of the texts reflect changes in theological opinion, but each chapter stands by itself. It would seem, however, that there was a traditional order in the sequence of the chapters. The 3 recensions. There were 3 recensions or versions of the Book of the Dead: the Heliopolitan, the Theban, and the Sate. The Heliopolitan recension was edited by the priests of the College of Anu, or On, known to the Greeks as Heliopolis, and was based upon texts not now recoverable. The pyramids of Unas, Teta, and Pepi contain the original texts of this recension, which represent the theological system introduced by the priests of Ra. The essentials of the primitive Egyptian religion are, however, retained, the only modification in them being the introduction of the solar doctrine of Ra. In later times, the priesthood of Ra were forced to acknowledge the supremacy of Osiris, and this theological defeat is visible in the more modern texts. Between the 6th and 11th dynasties, the priests of On edited a number of fresh chapters from time to time. The Theban recension was much in vogue from the 18th to the 22nd dynasties, and was usually written upon papyri and painted upon coffins in hieroglyphs. Each chapter was preserved distinct from the others, but appears to have had no distinct place in the entire collection. The Sate recension was definitely arranged at some date prior to the 26th dynasty, and is written upon coffins and papyri, and also in hieratic and demotic script. It continued to be employed to the end of the Ptolemaic period. As we have previously noticed, the Book of the Dead was for their use from the moment when they found themselves inhabitants of the other world. Magic was the very mainspring of existence in that sphere, and unless a spirit was acquainted with the formulae which compelled the respect of the various gods and demons, and even of inanimate objects, it was helpless. The region to which the dead departed the primitive Egyptians called Duat. They believed it to be formed of the body of Osiris. It was regarded as dark and gloomy, containing pits of fire and dreadful monsters which circled the earth, and was in its turn bounded by a river and a lofty chain of mountains. The part of it that was nearest to Egypt was regarded as a description of mingled desert and forest, through which the soul of the deceased might not hope to struggle unless guided by some benevolent spirit who knew the paths through this country of despair. Thick darkness covered everything, and under veil of this, the hideous inhabitants of the place practiced all sorts of hostility to the newcomer, unless by the use of words of power he could prove his superiority over them. But there was one delectable part in this horrid region, the Sekhet Hetepet, the Elysian fields which contained the Sekhet Aru, or the Field of Reeds, where dwelt the god Osiris and his company. At first he had domain over this part of the Duat alone, but gradually he succeeded in extending it over the entire country of the dead, of which he was monarch. We find also a god of the Duat named Duati, but who appears to have been more a personification of the region than anything else. Now the wish of all good men was to win to the kingdom of Osiris, and to that end they made an exhaustive study of the prayers and ritual of the Book of the Dead, in order that they might the more easily penetrate to the region of bliss. This they might reach by two ways, by land and by water. The path by water was no whit less dreadful than that by land, the passage of the soul being barred by streams of fire and boiling water, and the banks of the rivers navigated were populous with evil spirits. The place of reeds. We learn from the Theban recension that there were 7 halls or mansions in the Field of Reeds, all of which had to be passed through by the soul before it was received by the god in person. 3 gods guarded the door of each hall, the doorkeeper, watchman, and questioner. It was necessary for the newcomer to address each god by his name. There were also names for the doors which must be borne in mind. The name of each god was in reality a spell consisting of a number of words. The place of reeds was divided into 15 regions, each of which was presided over by a god. The first of these was called Amentet, where dwelt those souls who lived upon earth offerings. It was ruled over by Menuke. The second was Sekhet Aru, the Field of Reeds proper, the walls surrounding which were formed of the stuff of which the sky is made. Here dwelt the souls, who were 9 cubits high, under the rule of Ra-Heru-Kuti, and this place was the center of the kingdom of Osiris. The third was the place of the spirit souls, a region of fire. In the fourth dwelt the terrible serpent Sati Temui, which preyed on the dead who dwelt in the Duat. The fifth region was inhabited by spirits who fed upon the shadows of the weak and helpless souls. They appear to have been a description of vampire. The remaining regions were very similar to these. The journey of Osiris. We find other descriptions of the Duat in the Book of Gates and the Book of Him that is in the Duat, in which is outline. The Sun's Night Voyage. From Part 9, D. The journey that the Sun God makes through the otherworld after he has set upon the Earth world. Immediately after sinking, he takes the form of Osiris, which in this instance is that of a ram with a man's head. Coming to the antechamber of the Duat in the west, his entrance is heralded by songs of praise, raised by the ape gods, while serpents blow fire from their mouths, by the light of which his pilot gods steer his craft. All the doors are thrown open, and the dead, revived by the earthly air which Osiris carries with him, come to life again for a brief hour. All the creatures of this portion of the Duat are provided with meat and drink by command of the god. Such of the dead as dwell here are those who have failed to pass the various tests for entrance to his court, and all that they exist for is the material comfort provided for them by the brief diurnal passage of the deity. When the sun, who in this form is known as Af-Ra, reaches the entrance to the second part of the Duat, which is called Urness, the gods of the first section depart from him and do not again behold his face until the following night. At this point, the boat of Af-Ra is met by the boats of Osiris and his attendant gods. And in this place also Osiris desires that the dead should receive food, light, and air. Here he grapples with the serpents Hau and Neha-Her, as do most sun gods during the time of darkness, and, having overcome them, is led into the field of the grain gods, where he reposes for a while. When there he hearkens to the prayers of the living on behalf of the dead, and takes account of the offerings made by them. Continuing his journey, he traverses the 12 sections of the Duat. In some of these we see what were probably quite separate realms of the dead, such as the realm of Sekher, a god who is perhaps of greater antiquity than Osiris. In this place his boat is useless, as there is no river in the gloomy kingdom of Sekher, which appears completely alien to Osiris. He therefore repeats words of awful power, which compel the gods of the place to lead him by subterranean passages from which he emerges into Amhet, where is situated a stream of boiling water. But he is not out of the kingdom of Sekher until he reaches the 6th section, where dwell the dead kings of Egypt and the Ku, or spirit souls. It is at this point of his journey that Af-Ra turns his face toward the east and directs his course to the mountain of the sunrise. Previous to this, he has been journeying from the south to the north. In the 7th section, he is joined by Isis and other deities, and here his path is obstructed by the wicked serpent Apep, through whose body the attendant deities drive their daggers. A company of gods tow him through the 8th section, but his vessel sails itself through the 9th, and in the 10th and 11th he seems to pass over a series of lakes, which may represent the lagoons of the eastern delta. In the latter section, his progress is lighted by a disk of light, encircled by a serpent, which rests upon the prow of the boat. The 12th section contains the great mass of celestial waters called Nu, and here dwells Nut, the personification of the morning. Before the boat looms the great serpent Ankh-Neteru, and 12 of the gods, taking hold of the tow line, enter this serpent at the tail and draw the god in his boat through the monstrous body, bringing Af-Ra out at its mouth, but not as Af-Ra, for during this passage he has been transformed into Khepera, in which shape he is towed into the sky by 12 goddesses, who lead him before Shu, the god of the atmosphere of the terrestrial world. Shu places him in the opening in the semicircular wall which forms the end of the 12th section, and he now appears to mortal eyes as a disk of light, having discarded his mummified form, in which he traversed the duat. His progress is followed by the acclamations of his company of gods, who fall upon and destroy his enemies and sing hymns of praise to him. The duat, as described in the Book of Gates, differs considerably from that of the Book of Hymn that is in the duat, but it also possesses 12 sections, and a similar journey is outlined in it. The principal gods alluded to in the Book of the Dead are Tem or Atmu, Nu, Ra, Kepra, Ptah, Seka, Khnemu, Shu, Set, Horus, Thoth, Nephthys, Anubis, Amen, and Anu, in fact, the majority of the principal divinities of Egypt. Besides these, there were many lesser gods and a great company of spirits, demons, and other supernatural beings. Many of these demons were very ancient forms of half-forgotten deities. It will be noticed that at practically every stage of his journey, Osiris left behind him one or more of his divine companions, who henceforth were supposed to become the rulers or satraps of the regions in which he had quitted them. So might an earthly pharaoh reward his courtiers for services rendered. It was only during the Middle Kingdom that the conception of Osiris as judge of the dead took definite form and received general recognition. In one of the chapters of the Book of the Dead, we find him seated in a large hall, the roof of which is covered with fire and symbols of truth. Before him are the symbol of Anubis, the 4 sons of Horus, and the devourer of the West, a monster who serves as his protector. In the rear sit the 42 judges of the dead. The deceased makes his appearance before the god, and his heart is placed in a great balance to be weighed by Anubis, Thoth, the scribe of the gods, standing by to note the result upon his tablets. Having communicated this to Osiris, the dead man, if found worthy, is presented to the deity, to whom he repeats a long prayer, in which he states that he has not committed any evil. Those who could not pass the test were hurried away, and so far as is known were in danger of being devoured by a frightful monster called Bibi, which awaited them outside. The justified deceased took part in the life of Osiris and the other gods, which appears to have been very much the same as that of the Egyptian aristocracy. As has been said, the deceased might also transform himself into any animal form he cared. The life of the justified dead is well outlined in an inscription on the tomb of Paheri, Prince of El-Kab, which is as follows: "Thou goest in and out with a glad heart, and with the rewards of the gods. Thou becomest a living soul. Thou hast power over bread, water, and air. Thou changest thyself into a phoenix or a swallow, a sparrowhawk or a heron, as thou desirest. Thou dost cross in the boat and art not hindered. Thou sailest upon the water when a flood ariseth. Thou livest anew, and thy soul is not parted from thy body. Thy soul is a god together with the illuminated, and the excellent souls speak with thee. Thou art among them, and verily receivest what is given upon earth. Thou possessest water, possessest air, hast superabundance of that which thou desirest. Thine eyes are given to thee to see, and thine ears to hear speech. Thy mouth speaketh, thy legs move, thy hands and arms bestir themselves for thee. Thy flesh grows, thy veins are in health, and thou feelest thyself well in all thy limbs. Thou hast thine upright heart in thy possession, and thy earlier heart belongs to thee. Thou dost mount up to heaven, and art summoned each day to the libation table of Wenifre. Thou receivest the good which has been offered to him, and the gifts of the lords of the necropolis. The Book of the Dead is obviously an allegory of the passage of the sun through the underworld. The sinking of the sun at nightfall would naturally arouse in primitive man thoughts as to where the luminary dwelt during the hours of gloom, for the sun was to early man a living thing. He could watch its motion across the sky, and the light and other benefits which he received from it came to make him regard it as the source of all good. It appeared plain to him that its diurnal career was cut short by the attacks of some enemy, and the logical sequel of the belief in the solar deity as a beneficent power was, of course, that the force hostile to him must be of evil disposition. It came to be figured as a serpent or dragon, which nightly battled with the luminary and for a season prevailed. The gods of many religions have to descend into the otherworld to do battle with the forces of death and hell. We may see an analogy to the Book of the Dead in the Central American Popol Vuh, in which two hero gods, the sons and nephews of the sun and the moon, descend into the dark abyss of the Maya Hades, rout its forces, and return triumphant. It has been suggested that the Book of the Dead was nothing more or less than the ritual of a secret brotherhood, and that the various halls mentioned in it symbolized the several stages of initiation through which the members had to pass. It is curious that in his recent interesting book on Mexican archaeology, Mr. T. Athol Joyce of the British Museum has mentioned that the court of the Maya underworld, as alluded to in the Popol Vuh, seems to have been conducted on the principle of a secret society with a definite form of initiation. It is practically certain that the mysteries of Eleusis and similar Greek initiatory ceremonies were concerned with the life of the underworld, especially with the story of Demeter and Kor, or Ceres, and that a theatric representation of the wanderings of the mother in search of her daughter in the underworld was given in the course of the ceremonial. These Greek deities, besides being gods of the dead, were gods of agriculture, corn gods, but gods of the underworld often presided over the growth of the crops, as it was believed that the grain germinated underneath the earth by their influence. For example, we find in the Popol Vuh that Exquique, daughter of one of the lords of the underworld, was able to reap a field of maize in a few minutes in a spot where before there had been none. All this would seem to point to the probability that if the Book of the Dead did not contain an early type of initiatory ceremonial, it may have powerfully influenced the ceremonial of mysteries when they arose. The mysteries of the Kabiri, for example, are supposed to be of Egyptian origin. On the other hand, it may be possible that the Book of the Dead represents the ceremonial of an older prehistoric mystery, which had been forgotten by the dynastic Egyptians. Savage races all over the world possess such mysteries. The Indians of North America and the blackfellows of Australia possess most elaborate initiatory ceremonies, and it is quite possible that the Book of the Dead may preserve the ritual of Neolithic savages who practiced it thousands of years prior to its connection with the worship of Osiris. The place of punishment. Although there does not appear to have been a portion of the duat specially reserved for the wicked, they were sufficiently tormented in many ways to render their existence a punishment for any misdeeds committed during life. At one end of this region were pits of fire where grisly deities presided, superintending the destruction of the bodies of the deceased and hacking them to pieces before they were burned. Their punishment was, however, mitigated by the appearance of Ra Osiris on his nightly journey, for as he advanced their torments ceased for the time being. The deities who inflicted punishment upon the damned were the enemies of Ra Osiris, personifications of darkness, night, fog, mist, vapor, tempest, wind, and so f. The Halls of Amenti. From Part 5. Their proper and fitting place, but those who were accused of crimes lingered kneeling at the door, which pivoted upon the eye of a man who ceaselessly prayed and groaned. In the 6th hall were the gods of Amenti, who sat in council, each in his place, whilst the keepers of the portals called out the causes. In the 7th hall was seated the great god Osiris on a golden throne, crowned with the plumed diadem. On his left was Anubis, and on his right the god Thoth. In the midst were the scales, wherein were weighed the faults and virtues of the souls of the dead, while Thoth wrote down the judgment that Anubis pronounced. Then those whose faults outweighed their virtues were delivered to Amait, the attendant of the Lord of Amenti. Their souls and bodies were destroyed forever, but those whose virtues were greater than their failings took their place among the gods and shades, and there their souls found a heaven. Those, again, whose merits and faults were equal were put amongst the servitors of Sekher Osiris. Then Setna saw near the place of Osiris one of exalted rank and robed in the finest linen. And while Setna was marveling at all he had seen in the land of Amenti, see Osiris, his little son, said unto him, My father Setni, seest thou that great personage in fine robes and near to Osiris? That peasant whom thou didst see carried out of Memphis without a soul to accompany him, and his body wrapped in a mat, dost thou remember, my father? Well, that peasant is the one beside Osiris. When he had come to Amenti, and they weighed his faults and virtues, lo, his virtues outweighed all. And by the judgment of the gods, all the honors that had been the share of the rich man were given to the peasant. And by the law of Osiris, he takes his place midst the honored and exalted. But the rich man, when he had come to Hades and his merits were weighed, lo, his faults weighed heavier, and he is that man you have seen upon whose eye pivots the door of the 5th hall, the man who cries and prays aloud with great agony. By the life of Osiris, god of Amenti, if upon earth I said to thee, rather may the fate of the peasant be thine than that of the rich man, it was because I knew their fates, my father. And Setna answered and said, My son, say Osiris, numberless marvels have I seen in Amenti, but tell me the meaning of those people we saw rushing before creatures who devoured them, and the others ever trying to reach the food beyond their reach. See, Osiris answered him, In truth, my father, they are under the curse of the gods. They are those who upon earth wasted their substance, and the creatures who devour them without ceasing are the women with whom they squandered both life and substance, and now they have naught, though they should work day and night. And so it is with all. As they have been on earth, so it is with them in Amenti, according to their good and bad deeds. That is the immutable law of the gods, the law that knows no change, and under which all men must come when they enter Hades. Then Setna and his son returned hand in hand from the mountains of Memphis. A fear was upon Setna because of Osiris, who answered not, and then he pronounced words that exorcised the ghosts of the dead. Always afterward he remembered all he had seen and marveled thereat, but spoke of it to no man. And when Osiris was 12 years of age, there was no scribe or magician in Memphis who was his equal in the reading of the magical books, the reading of the sealed letter. After this, it happened one day that the pharaoh Osiris was seated in the hall of audience with the princes, the military chiefs, and the nobles of Egypt, each according to his rank, gathered about him. One said unto Pharaoh, Here is a rascally Ethiopian who would fain have speech with you, and who carries a sealed letter. and Pharaoh commanded that the man be brought before him. And when he was come, he made obeisance and said, "Here is a sealed letter which I bear, and I would fain know if amongst your wise men there are any who can read its contents without breaking the seals. If, O king, you have not such a one among your scribes and magicians, I shall take back to my country, the land of the Negro, the story of Egypt's failure and inferiority." Upon hearing these words, all were amazed, and those about the king exclaimed loudly, while Pharaoh bade some bring to him his son Setna. When he had come, instantly obeying the royal command and bowing low before him, Pharaoh said, "My son Setna, hast thou heard the words of this insolent Ethiopian?" And then he repeated the challenge. Then was Setna astonished, but he answered immediately, "Great Lord, who can read a letter without its being opened and spread before him? But if you will give me 10 days, I will think upon it and do what I can to avoid the report of Egypt's failure being carried to the Negroes, eaters of gum." And Pharaoh said, "Those days are granted, my son." Then were rooms appointed for the Ethiopian, and Pharaoh rose from his palace sad at heart and went fasting to his couch. And Setna, pondering and much disturbed, threw himself upon his couch, but knew no rest. His wife, Mahituasket, came to him and would fain have shared his trouble, but he said that it was not for a woman to share, or one that she might help him in. Later, his son Osiris came and begged to know what so sorely troubled his father, and again Setna refused to speak, saying that it was not for a child. But the boy persisted, and at last Setna told him of the challenge of the Ethiopian. The moment he had finished, Osiris laughed, and his father asked the reason of his mirth. "My father," he answered, "I laugh to see you there, so troubled in heart because of such a small affair. I will read that letter of the Ethiopian, read it all without breaking the seals." Hearing this, Setna rose instantly. "But what proof can you give me of the truth of what you say, my son?" Osiris answered, "My father, go thou to the lower floor of this house and take what books you please from their place. As you do so, I shall read that which you have taken from its place while I stand before you." And it happened, as Osiris had said. Each book that his father lifted the boy read without its being opened. Upon this, Setna lost no time in acquainting Pharaoh with all that Osiris had done, and so lightened was the heart of the king that he made a feast in honor of Setna and his young son. After this, Pharaoh sent for the Ethiopian, and when he entered the hall of audience, he was placed in the midst of all, and the young Osiris took up his place beside him. But first the boy put a curse upon the man and his gods, if he should dare to say falsely that what he read was not true. And seeing the boy, the Ethiopian prostrated himself before him in fear. Then Osiris began to read the letter with its seals still unbroken, and all heard his voice. And the words were, the contents of the letter. It happened during the reign of the pharaoh Menakfre-Siemon, who was a beneficent ruler, and in whose time the land overflowed with all good things, who endowed the temples richly, that when the king of Nubia was taking his rest in the pleasure kiosk of Amen, he overheard the voices of 3 Ethiopians who were talking behind the house. One of them was speaking in a high voice, saying, among other things, that if the god Amen would preserve him from the enmity of the king of Egypt, he could put a spell on the people of that country, so that a great darkness should reign, and they should not see the moon for 3 days and 3 nights. Then the second man said that if Amen would guard him, he would cause the pharaoh to be transported to the land of the Negroes, and there, before the king of that country and in public, he should suffer 500 blows, and afterward he should be taken back to his country, in not more than 6 hours. After this, the third man spoke, saying that if Amen would preserve him, he would then send a blight upon the land of Egypt, a blight for the space of 3 years. When the king heard this, he ordered that these 3 men be brought before him. He said unto them, "Which of you said that he would cause that the people of Egypt should not see the moon for 3 days and 3 nights? And they answered that it was Horus, the son of Tririt, the sow. Again the king said, "Which of you said that he had power to cause the king of Egypt to be brought hither?" And they answered that it was Horus, the son of Tanasit, the negress. Again the king said, "Which of you said that he would cause a blight to fall upon Egypt?" And they answered that it was Horus, the son of Trifit, the princess. Then the king bade Horus, the son of Tanasit, come near, and he said to him, "By Amen, the bull of Meroe, if thou canst accomplish what thou hast said, then rich rewards shall be thine." And Horus, the son of Tanasit, fashioned a litter and 4 bearers of wax. Over them he chanted magical words. He breathed upon them and gave them life. And finally he bade them wend their way to Egypt and bring back the king of that land, in order that he might suffer 500 blows from the courbash before the king of the Negroes. Here Osiris paused and, turning to the Ethiopian, said, "The curse of Amen fall upon thee. These words that I have said, are they not written in the letter thou holdest in thine hand?" And the rascally Ethiopian bowed low before him, saying, "They are written there, my lord." Then Osiris resumed his magical reading, and all happened as Horus, the son of Tanasit, had devised. By the power of sorcery was Pharaoh taken to the land of the Negroes, and there suffered 500 blows of the courbash. After that, he was carried back to Egypt, as had been said, and, wakening the next morning in the temple of the god Horus, he lay in great pain, his body sorely bruised. Bewildered, he asked his courtiers how such could have happened in Egypt. They, thinking some madness had fallen upon their king, and yet ashamed of their thoughts, spoke soothingly to him, and said that the great gods would heal his afflictions. But still they asked him the meaning of his strange words, and suddenly he remembered all that had happened to him, and recounted it to his courtiers. Magic versus magic. When they saw his bruised body, they made a great clamor. And then Pharaoh sent for his chief magician, and he at once cried out that the evil and affliction of the king were due to the sorceries of the Ethiopians. "By the life of Ptah," he continued, "I shall bring them to torture and execution." And Pharaoh bade him make all speed, lest he should be carried away the next night. And the chief magician carried his secret books and amulets to the place where Pharaoh lay, and chanted above him magical words and incantations. Then, with many gifts, he embarked in a boat and made haste to reach the temple of Kumunon, and there he prayed to the god Thoth that all evil should be averted from Pharaoh and the land of Egypt. And that night he slept in the temple, and he dreamed a dream in which the god Thoth appeared to him and instructed him in divine magic that would preserve the king from the wiles of the Ethiopians. On waking, the magician remembered all, and without losing a moment fulfilled all that he had been told in his dream. And then he wrote the charm to preserve Pharaoh from all sorcery. On the second day, the Ethiopians endeavored to renew their enchantments, but all was now unavailing against the person of Pharaoh. The third morning, Pharaoh recounted to his chief musicians all that had happened during the night, and how the Ethiopians had failed in their attempts. Then the magician fashioned a litter and 4 bearers of wax. He put a spell upon them and breathed life into them, bidding the And so we come to the end of tonight's reading. Sleep well, dream of old worlds. Until tomorrow night.